Not too long ago, the story I'm about to share with you was something I was frankly too embarrassed to mention at all. I was humiliated and filled with the same kind of shame our colleague Laura mentioned earlier. It was the words and the labels: survivor, victim, accused, and these terms like suspected that really made me feel like I needed to keep these things hidden and to myself. But I am a domestic violence survivor. And already I've thrown out a lot of words that are going to make you really uncomfortable, and we're going to add to that the words trauma and post-traumatic growth. These words feel heavy and dark and serious, and they are. But I also want you to know that there's light and love and triumph and even laughter in these moments. So as we share these next few minutes together, I want to let you know it's okay to smile. Even under your masks, I'll see your smiles. And it's okay to laugh. It really is. So, a priest, a preacher, and a rabbi walk into a bar. No. You can catch my stand-up later. Right now, I need you to come back with me to about 2007, 2008. This is right before the financial crisis. I was a pretty popular 30-something music teacher. I was raising 2 little girls with dance classes and birthday parties. I lived in my dream little salt box house with cherry cabinets in one of those formal living rooms you never sat in. At church, I was the VBS coordinator and the bell choir director, and I sang in the ladies' small group. I had a copious collection of holiday sweater vests to go with my mock turtlenecks and my very polite bob. Yes. Slightly different from the cuffed and inked person you see in front of you today. My life was pretty prescribed. But I felt like I had won the lottery. I was living this life with my second husband. He was an investment banker, 7 years older than me, with no children. A 180 from the college musician I had married the first time. I felt like God himself had delivered me a grown-up to fix everything that I thought was broken inside of me. We had, after all, actually met at church. This was one of the myriad of reasons why I would come to ignore his disparaging remarks about women, sort of tolerate the rants when I bought too much at Target, and eventually put out of my head the night that he lifted me completely off the ground by my neck in a full-blown rage over rearranging the furniture in that formal living room. This time in my life, unfortunately, got darker when we were faced with infertility and 2 subsequent miscarriages, and then finally, a pregnancy that stuck. And instead of this lifting up my voice, I became more committed to my silence because now he had a child involved. So instead of taking other actions, I took us to Christian couples counseling. This ended up being a very ineffective approach to deal with our problems. And so meekly and quietly, I went and filed a restraining order. He counterfiled with divorce papers. My own attorney said to me, "You need to drop this order. You look adversarial, and your assigned judge does not like adversarial women." I complied. 48 hours later, my life turned completely inside out. Police detectives came to my door and said, "We are certain we have a credible threat against your life from your estranged husband. We cannot make you, but we are asking that you please go into hiding." So 4 weeks, 3 days before the birth of my son, that's exactly what I did. I disappeared. And with it, the bell choir, and the teaching job, and the dance lessons, and the chair cabinets, and the sweater vests, which I don't miss so much. I disappeared. And those things were replaced instead with more than a year, nearly 2 years, of living in hiding, using a different name, moving from shelter to shelter, domestic violence shelter, homeless shelters, family shelters, until there were finally no more shelters and just complete homelessness. It became a whirlwind of lawyers and guardian ad litems and going to courts and visitations and things I felt completely unprepared to deal with in my life. And I could tell you some pretty gut-wrenching stories about that time in my life, but it's actually not what I want to talk to you about, because it's the next chapter that made all the difference. It's what happened after that time that allows me to stand here today. Now, when I tell my story to people, there's kind of a short list of automatic responses that they give me. There are things like, "You're so lucky to have survived." Also, "Everything happens for a reason." We're going to come back to that one. And the one I hear an awful lot, which is, "You are so resilient." I am resilient, but I am no more so resilient than anybody else in this room. And I want to disparage a little bit of the talk we've been giving societally about resilience, because I'm going to tell you it's overrated. Resilience is pitched like it's the win. This is how we get to the finish line, by being resilient. And resilience literally means to return to the shape or space of what was after stress. But my friends, if what was has shifted, you are not at the end, you are at the beginning. It's easier to describe like this. Picture you're on a boat. You've gone to the ledge, the side to look over, and you fall in. So what's your first instinct? It's church. I know you all know how to participate. I'm laity, but you're not. You're going to swim, right? You're going to swim like hell to the surface because you know you're going to die if you don't. That's your resilience. Now, can you have tools, better tools for resilience? Absolutely. Maybe you got swimming lessons. Maybe you had on a life vest. Those tools matter in your resilience, for sure. But assuming you got to the surface, you've survived, but you are still in the water. When you encounter a person experiencing trauma who's surviving, I submit to you, they are still in the water. And it's the plan to get out that we've got to deal with. That plan is actually called post-traumatic growth. And right now there are people in this room and they are card filing their own versions of trauma to decide if it is big enough to undertake something like post-traumatic growth. So let me give you a little science. Trauma lives in every one of our bodies as a physiological response. It lives in your brain, it lives in your actual tissues, and it does not matter what that trauma is, whether you were a Neanderthal man running from the saber-toothed tiger, or whether it is a car accident, or domestic violence, or a job loss, or a pandemic. Inside of our brains and bodies, it feels the exact same, and we will relive that cycle, what we now commonly call a trigger, unless we learn how to deal with our trauma. When we do that, we get agency over it and the power to use it as a catalyst for transformation. That's what post-traumatic growth is all about. So post-traumatic growth itself is a study, a psychological study. It's fairly recent. It was developed in the 1990s by two main researchers, Lawrence Calhoun and Dr. Richard Tedeschi. And they were really curious about what was happening to trauma survivors, some who succumbed, and some who tended to have this new outlook on life where they were getting richer relationships, more contentment, feeling more gratitude, even experiencing changes in their spirituality. They wanted to know what that actually looked like and how it could be broken down. And it turned out that there were 5 distinct steps that most survivors of trauma who were thriving actually followed. And that is what is considered today post-traumatic growth. Now, I am not a therapist, and like several others today, though, You should have a therapist. You could get a therapist. Therapy is good. All of that is true. I am what Tedeschi calls an expert companion. I am someone who has lived through a trauma and has used the steps of post-traumatic growth. So I'm here to walk alongside people to help them develop a plan to get out of the water. To be clear, this is not a rescue mission. I am not the rescuer, I'm the partner. And as you work with post-traumatic growth, please be the partner and not the rescuer. So post-traumatic growth has 5 steps. They are education, limitation, strengths, narration, and service. We start with education. And education is our why. It is the understanding of what actually happened to us and why. So remember those everything happens for a reason, folks? They are dangerous out of the box. So you've got to intervene on that if you are helping someone as a faith leader. Because everything happens for a reason is not the answer. When we experience trauma, it makes us feel powerless. It takes away our agency, and we can even feel complicit. I did not get abused by my husband because some Machiavellian God placed me in that relationship and said she'll be strong enough to endure it. I became a domestic violence survivor because it is so prevalent in our society, this kind of intimate partner abuse, that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men are experiencing it. That knowledge gave me the opportunity and the power to be able to begin to forgive myself for what was happening. Now, the second step, if you're not uncomfortable enough already, the second step is limitation. It's dealing with our loss. So we are living in a society right now of toxic positivity that really wants to pink cloud everything. We don't want to talk about loss. But there is loss in trauma, even when the outcome on the other side is so much better. Look, I got a much better haircut now than I did back then. It's better now. But I spent years being consumed by this anger and this sort of unrealized rage because I felt like I couldn't talk about the loss of my career, of my home, of my own name, because I was supposed to feel grateful that I was just here and had survived. Instead, in limitation, we get to name our loss. We get to write it down and rip it up, or better yet, write it down and set that shit on fire like a Viking funeral. Okay? If you can't write it down, go yell it outside into the night sky and watch it dissipate. But we have to be able to grieve our loss. We have to be able to mourn our loss, and then we can set it free. The next step is strength. When we experience a trauma, we often uncover new strengths. When I work with folks as a coach in post-traumatic growth, I actually developed a deck of 215 cards. These have been curated strength cards so that we can identify what we are left with in strength. 2 of mine ended up becoming voice, because boy, was I a meek, polite Midwestern girl, and tenacity. And I've got to tell you, as I've grown out from my trauma, I needed those strengths that had boiled out of me from it. And being able to have, again, that agency and that freedom to say, this is who I am now, helped me move forward. And it helped me move forward to the 4th step, which is narration. As faith leaders, you have the opportunity to hear these stories. This is the combination of our limitations, of our strengths, and of our education, not to cast a story of being a victim and surviving, but instead to cast a story of a spirit who went through something trying and transformed on the other side. I am one of the millions of women who've suffered intimate partner violence. I lost my home and my career and my name. But I found my authentic voice, and I developed my tenacity, and I emerged on the other side with a life bigger and better than I ever could have imagined. The final step is service. Service takes this narration, and it translates it not just for the survivor, for the thriver, but for others as well. And service doesn't have to be something huge. You don't need to change your life or your career. No need to found another nonprofit. This can be something as small as developing deeper interpersonal relationships with your newfound vulnerability. Or something like dressing as a clown to go to the children's hospital because you've discovered your ability to bring laughter and cheer in the face of grief and loss. These are profound ways to live into the survival of your trauma. Now, if you've seen somebody come out on the other side of post-traumatic growth, you know it. You may not have named it as such, but you know the difference between someone whose spirit is lit up after these events and someone who has been pushed down from these events. That's what I call thrivership. And the good news is that while it isn't as linear as I've laid out for you in truth, and it isn't as fast as you would want it to be, and it certainly isn't as simple, it is within reach for every single one of us. And so what I am wishing for you all today, and what I will tell you you deserve so much more than survivorship. You deserve thrivership. Thank you.